Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. Chris, we want to talk again today about our favorite subject, even though it's a monster that we have to talk about, and that's the Federal Reserve. And currently, of course, most people, if they're watching the business news, realize that the central bankers are in a planning mood. They're all up in Jackson Hole having a good time. But the reports are okay, so we shouldn't be really critical of the Federal Reserve. They're such good people, and they're so sincere, and they're well motivated. But anyway, they are saying it's good, and on the surface, it sounds like a good story. You know, Jay Powell, the chairman for the Federal Reserve, who runs the show, is in charge in many ways of the world currency, and there are 45 other central bankers up at Jackson Hole. And just a little while ago, Powell gave the special report, and said everything is fine. It's worked out fine. We sort of looked after Greenspan. He did a good job. So we sort of followed him, keep interest rates low, work to get the right amount of inflation. We have the right amount of inflation, just at 2%, nothing over it, and the economy is booming, the stock market is high, and unemployment is low. So we won't mess around. We'll be cautious and smart. So the stock market went up another 150 points today. So everybody's pretty happy with it. So why in the world would we pick this day with all this euphoria to say, hey, watch out? There's trouble out there. Of course, we've been saying that. It's because, perpetual wealth can't be created out of thin air by a secret central bank supporting the deep state and make sure that everybody has a happy ending to this. And it still doesn't even think about addressing the fact that, that there's a fight going on in this country because of the maldistribution of wealth. The wealthy get wealthier and the poor get poorer and the middle class is getting wiped out. That sort of is forgotten. But on the surface, things look pretty good. And Chris, I know you've been sort of interested. I don't know if it's because you might be in that age group or something, but how about young people, the millennials? How are they going to do? Are they going to, or should they just say, hey, we're okay, let's go back. We're not going to worry too much about a job and working hard and saving because it looks like we'll be taken care of. But I think you've come to a different conclusion than that.
Yes, I am a little older than the millennials, but for the millennials, yes, the Fed is working against you, and you may just not see it. But, if most of you come out of college with debt, from a government that's broke, they were somehow able to lend out over $1 trillion. How does that happen? Well, they have a central bank to help them out. And they created a bubble economy. And it's not the first bubble economy. We've had several before us, and they've all ended badly. And what happens is you'll get a job, and maybe with a company that has no earnings, no revenues, just like the .com. It doesn't seem to matter when the Fed's bubble is taking place. But ultimately, reality sets in, and then a bust sets in. And the company that wasn't making any money has to go bankrupt, and now you're out of a job, and you may have to move back with your parents, sell everything you own, and now you're really in deep trouble. And this is the cycle that the Fed creates over and over. But they like to shield it with their bubbles on how great things are, but all their bubbles have to come to a sorry end.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that it's a grand recovery, and better than ever because it's the longest. We know that, but it was mainly because about 8 years of this 10-year booming economy, they were just doing QEs and pumping and praying there would be price inflation because they believe if you have price inflation at 2%, you have a healthy economy, which is total nonsense. And when I think about how they act, whether it's our Federal Reserve board members or anybody I know in Washington or these people up in Jackson Hole, I think of Hayek's pretense of knowledge, pretending or assuming or believing that they have this perfect knowledge, that they have the vaguest notion of what an interest rate should be. And that's all they really talk about. What should the interest rates be? And now they're inching upwards. They still have a long way to go because they are way below the market rate. And it'll get turned off before it gets too much further, because then they'll have what they call a heated economy. And I think it's all fiction too, because they say, well, we got inflation, and they measure it by CPI, a little bit over 2%, and that's about right. But what about the stock market? Can't you have inflation in the stock market? What they don't realize is if they do, they want to make sure that people don't realize it. If the Fed creates money for the benefit of the special interests, it will inevitably raise prices. What is thought to be the case, and Mises talks about this, it won't raise the prices the same way all the time and evenly. Some prices go up, some prices go down. And in this recovery and this massive inflation, instead of them saying there's no inflation, I see massive inflation because I look at the QEs and the money supply and all this going on. And then you say, well, where did it go? And that's when you have to search for it. There's malinvestment and debt. There's plenty of debt around. You already, Chris, mentioned about the debt. There's a lot of debt there, and there's government debt and malinvestment, and which will need the correction to come. So they're arguing the case that the inflation is very, very good, and we can contain it, and we can control it, and that we know what the rate should be. And it's going for 10 years, but the truth is most of those years were very, very bad. And right now the economic statistics have improved, and they look good, but it doesn't eliminate the fact that if you have lower than market rates of interest, you make a lot of mistakes and you get excessive debt, and it has to be liquidated. The malinvestment needs to liquidate it as well as the debt. And I think, Chris, this fits into your argument about young people having too much debt. But it's not only their personal debt, but and you know, their student debt. But what about the debt and unsupported, Social Security and all these funds? This is tremendous, and they sort of inherit that too. So debt is a huge burden, and yet if you look at what the Republicans are doing now that they're in charge, do they look worried about the debt? There's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of it's very annoying, all this Russiagate and all this stuff. But it is a total distraction from some of the big issues like what we're talking about. The Republicans, are they worried about raising, spending to a level where they ask, well, yeah, the deficit each year will be over $1 trillion. That's no big deal. We can handle that. And then they argue the case that, well, the Federal Reserve better not raise interest rates now, or we may crack down on them, this sort of thing. So I think that what the millennials are, looking forward to is a big burden of debt, both personal, corporate debt, and all the work. And then there's going to be payment. I always think that if a society lives beyond it means, unfortunately, it'll live beneath it means. I'm sure people in Venezuela lived way beyond their means for a long time, and they did not live with a market economy, and they had wealth of oil. They still have the oil, but there is no wealth. And I think that's what people have to realize can happen to almost anybody that messes up an economy with central banking. And that's why ultimately we have to talk about, getting rid of the principle of central banking, and the Fed really is something that I've found has been very popular with young people. And the ones that came to the rallies and shouted, end the Fed, were not Bernie Sanders supporters, even though some of them may be a little bit confused on, well, a little bit of socialism is good, but that's not the case. I think the young people are going to shout, end the Fed, and that will be a healthy move in the right directions rather than saying what we need is more handouts.
Mm-hmm. And our concern is, the bubble is already here. It's already happened. It's done with. Our concern is with what comes next and where the blame should be pointed at, because we're going to have at some point a inflationary depression, is what I believe. And there's going to be so much quote unquote misinformation out there. We're used to that word now, because you won't be able to rely on the media. Who knows? They'll say Russia's caused our problems, and you can't rely on your college professor because they'll just blame a fictional free market that doesn't exist. And you can't rely on politicians because they'll tell you, what do you mean prices are going up? Everything is better than ever. You're going to have to understand that the source of all of this is the Federal Reserve. They create the bubbles, they create the busts, they profit off of it, they profit off of the good times and the bad times. You just don't want to be wondering where all this is coming from if you understand sound money and getting rid of this nuisance of ours.
It is the best weapon the deep state have. As long as they have control of the financial system and the banking system, Federal Reserve and Treasury, I think the deep state is protected. So always the people at the Federal Reserve and in our Treasury are very, very much involved in protecting the deep state and the financial system, whether it's the welfare state or corporate welfareism or the military-industrial complex or the international financial order. This is all, a part of it. And they will continue to do this if they're not called to task. But they have been able to get away with this and serve their interest. But there's other tools that they have too. And these were set up in 1987. Not many people talk about this because I guess the Federal Reserve, and it's more open now than it used to be, because everybody knows, or at least so many now, recognize the Fed is there to keep the stock market high. Well, if the stock market falls, they do have tools, and I think they still use it, and that is referred to as the Plunge Protection Team, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. And this was established when the crash, big crash in stocks happened in 1987, and they set up this committee by executive order, and they can do practically anything they want. They do that anyway, but it's done in secrecy. And just like the Fed doesn't go to the Congress to appropriate money, and they deal in trillions of dollars, the Plunge Protection Team is made up of the Federal Reserve, Treasury, the CFTC, and also the SEC. Just think of all that they can do with those organizations, threats, intimidation, changing the rules, and it's the worst part of a managed economy. And guess what happens with that? They get involved, they serve their special interests, and they pretend everything is perfect. And then some people who do suffer, and there are some, they open up the door to the socialist demagogues and say, see what it does, see what it does? And you have to say, yeah, it is a mess. But it isn't free market. It isn't sound money. It's central banking. It's done by fiat money, and it's done by all these shenanigans that are going on. And that is what has to be realized. So sorting out this truth. This is really where truth ought to be sorted out. But this is not what the debate of. The sorting out of the truth today is which political party is telling the biggest lies. And it gets rather disgusting, because when it comes to deficits, it comes to the Federal Reserve, it comes to the police state, and a violation of our privacy, if it comes to our empire around the world, they're not talking about this. They're not really arguing about that. That is so well ingrained that they just have to keep it together. And they've done fairly well. When you think that, things were really rocky in 08 and 09, and we still exist. But it can't exist forever. And Chris, I think that's what the message that we have to get out. And Chris, if you have a closing statement, you're welcome to give it.
I do, Dr. Paul. We are being ripped off. We should have money that holds its value, or even better, increases in value. Wouldn't it be nice to have money that next year will buy more instead of constantly buying less? And that's how it is. You have to work. I work like 12 hours a day. Government takes a big chunk of the income, and what's left, the Federal Reserve takes more out of that by decreasing the value of the money that's in my wallet. That's a horrible deal, but they force us into this. But we don't have to be forced into this, not forever at least. We may be for a while, but not forever. But the more people that understand that money is a function of the marketplace, chosen by people in the market, government does not have to have anything to do with it. And we can someday have, like gold, silver, money that holds its value or increases in value.
Very, very good. And what you point out is that what the Fed is doing is it's taxing the economy, and they collect taxes by devaluing the currency, and it's regressive. The poor and the middle class, and this is one reason why there's a distortion on wealth, and that is because the middle class and the poor suffer more from the prices going up. And yet that's a deliberate policy, of the Fed, is to destroy the value of the money. And you also mentioned why, if we had a sound currency, wouldn't it be nice if prices go down and the purchasing power of your dollar goes up? They don't understand that. They don't want to understand it, because it ruins the case for the perpetual mismanagement of money and the printing of money and passing out to their favorite friend. But what you've referred to is the fact that in sound money, the purchasing power of the dollar goes up. It's not deflation. Prices are going down in deflation. That's one thing. But when prices go down because there's more productivity and the value of the currency is going up, this makes people richer. And there's a lot of misunderstanding there. So I'm always delighted when I meet with young people and they're very interested in monetary policy, and it's a good thing, because they better stay interested, and it'd be a good idea to keep studying about this. Get to the Mises Institute and look up some of Murray Rothbard's books and Hayek's books and Mises's book to study money, because it's a very important issue. Without sound money, you can't have freedom. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.